information to cover. We want to make sure that we're able to give you everything that we need. And I need to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and it's going to be posted on the website. So let's get started. Welcome to Beam Practice Improvement Network, Conversion and Analysis of CPT Weights. I'm Julie Gutowski, Managing Director of Clinical Operations of Spectrum Human Services, and I'm joined by David Wozniak, and we'll speak a little bit more about David in a few minutes. Let's get started with our agenda. Basically, what we're going to take some time to recap from the last webinar, really talk about CPT weights. What is the definition of a CPT weight? Why are CPT weights important? How do you convert from a different system to utilizing CPT weights? Calculation of percent of billed hours to paid hours. And how do you incorporate no-shows into that? Then we'll be talking about some action steps and then a wrap-up. So review action steps for Module 4. Basically, review the direct cost section with your core team. These are the things we wanted you to do, and if you haven't done so, if you could please do so, we would appreciate it. Any questions that came up, you can check the Beam resource page for the recording and notes from last week's office hours. It's really important because we had people ask some really great questions, and for one reason or another, they weren't able to attend the office hours. So make sure you check that information. And any questions you answered via the post, survey, or chat, we tried to answer for you. And please take this time to update your quick analysis when you finish with the webinar. We have a couple polling questions, and the first one is, did you log in alone or as a core team? Your options are you logged in by yourself, with up to 4 other people, or more than 5 people. The second polling question is, who's on the line? Finance, clinic leadership, executive leadership, clinician, professional staff, and you can select more than one answer. The final question we have for the beginning of the webinar is, do you feel like you understand how weighted CPT units impact your clinic's finances, yes or no, or are you unsure? We're going to give everybody a few seconds to complete these polling questions, and then we'll be able to give you the results. A few more seconds and we'll be able to get the results. And can you close out the polling questions, please, Jessie?
Yep, the responses are coming up now.
Thank you. Okay, so did you log in alone or as part of the team? Most of us, it looks like about 57% logged in by yourself. And then the next highest was up to 4 other people. And who's on the line? It looks like we have a really good blend of finance, clinic leadership, executive leadership. And then do you feel like you understand how weighted CPT units affect your finances? A fair share of us said yes, and unsure was about 35%. So hopefully you'll, at the end of today's webinar, will have a better understanding of why CPT weights are important.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning. I think you did a very fine job standing in for Andy, who was on vacation this week. My name is David Wozniak. I'm the CFO of Spectrum Human Services, and Julie and I are going to take you through some of the concepts around CPT weights. Although we called it conversion and analysis of CPT weights, we're also going to talk about issues related to productivity. We're going to talk a little bit about communication. We'll talk a little bit about some of the barriers regarding using a CPT weight. And at the end, we'll circle back and show you a little bit how these concepts are used within the modeling tool itself. So let's get started here. And so the first question is, what the heck is a CPT unit? Well, let me back up for a second. when we started taking a look at this project, we decided that it was extremely important for us to be able to compare, to have information, compare information across multiple providers. And one of the things that it was very clear to us is that we needed a standard definition of a unit of service. We had the old OMH unit of service standards. We have the new OMH definition of a unit. Some people count contacts. Some people weight their contacts differentially. And we were taking a look at this mix and really needed to land on a unit of service definition. First of all, that was standard for the project. But second of all made sense to us. And so what we did is we started taking the Medicaid service weights and related to the CPT codes. That's why we call them CPT weights, and began using those weights as the measure of a unit of service. So as an example, if you go and take a look at a 90834, which is an individual psychotherapy visit of 45 minutes, the CPT weight for that is 0.8275. So when one of your clinical staff provides an individual therapy visit of 45 minutes, they would basically be awarded 0.8275 of a unit of service. If they did two of those, obviously you would add those two things together, and that would then they would have a service count for those 2 units of a 1.655. It's a relatively simple concept. Is you take the weight, and that's the unit that you produce. It's an interesting. Some of the difficulties with that is helping people understand is you can never really generate one unit of service because none of the CPT weights are equal to 1. So that's a simple format that we use. I'm taking a look at why we chose this and why is using a CPT unit important. And we're basically recommending to people that they really, if they've not converted the unit of service standard to CPT weights, that they should really think about that. The CPT weight really more accurately measures the cost incurred when providing clinical services because they're both time sensitive and service provider sensitive. I'll show you an example about that later, but in reality what we're saying is that the unit that you get for a 30-minute psychotherapy visit is 0.6. The unit that you get for a 45-minute psychotherapy is the 0.8. So the amount of units of service that you generate is sensitive to the amount of time that you're spending providing that service. The other thing is that they're service provider sensitive in that the service weights that are provided to your psychiatric service providers, who tend to be more expensive, tend to have a higher rate, or higher weight. So they're sensitive to cost. They're also a more accurate measure of the revenue that will be received for each clinical service. So not only do they more accurately reflect what your inputs are or your costs are, they more accurately reflect the revenue that you're going to generate from that, because the revenue is basically the CPT weight times the upstate or the downstate rate for Medicaid. So it's a very simple, the more inputs you have, that is the more time you spend, the more it costs the clinic, but then you also receive more revenue for that service, at least specifically to Medicaid. So when we took a look at CPT, we said, good, we find that we really finally have a unit of service measure that is more accurate. It more accurately represents our inputs, which are our costs, and our outputs, which are our revenue. Here's an example. This is basically a 90791, which is the initial assessment and diagnostic with treatment plan and treatment plan. It takes more time, has more paperwork involved, doing a full assessment. May need to look at records from prior services to do a good diagnostic workup, and that's going to pay at a service weight of 1.0344. And as you can see, the upstate Medicaid revenue for that will be $143.75. On the other hand, you have a psychotherapy visit in 90832 of 30 minutes. That's a 30-minute visit. And you have a progress note, and that's pretty much the inputs on that. That pays out, that weights in at 6.206 at $86. So again, we're at a point that we're looking for our units of service to accurately measure inputs, costs, and accurately reflect outputs, revenue.
So if you guys have ever heard me speak on a webinar before, you would understand that David is the math man. David is great with numbers. I'm the clinic person who's okay at numbers, but what I focus on is what do I need to do in order to do my job, and my job is to make sure that clinic has excellent services and that it can fiscally be viable, meaning it can afford itself. And so when David first started talking to me about the CPT weights, I kind of glossed my eyes over for a minute, and then I said, well, you know, let's really talk about what do I need to know. And so for me, what does this really mean for clinic operations? 1 does not equal 1. What I mean by that is a quarter does not equal $1. And if I ever said to you, can I trade my quarter for $1, you would look at me like I was a little bit weird, because we know inherently 1 does not equal 1. The way we used to run clinic a lot of times, it was a contact was 1. So if I were really great at running groups, I would have 12 people in my group, and it would take me an hour, and I would get 12 contacts. Now what we're really looking at and understanding that 1 does not equal 1, that certain services we are reimbursed different rates for, and therefore they need to have a different value. Okay? When you're looking at clinic operations and CPT weights, you really need to consider the service mix that's offered and provided. And what I mean by that is if I'm looking at my schedule and it's a 7.5-hour day, I want to think about how many assessments do I want to put in there, how many 30-minute versus 45-minute appointments. So I'm really looking at, am I doing the complex case management pieces? Those are the service mix I'm talking about, really having people to start to think about. Each service needs to be evaluated based on clinical appropriateness and fiscal viability. And if we go back to my example that I have a group and I have 12 members in my group who attend, I'm not going to get 12 contacts anymore. I'm going to get a different weight, but when you figure it out, you figure out how many people need to participate in your group in order for it to kind of even out the amount of time it takes you to do the group and the paperwork necessary. So you're going to look at those things, and sometimes if you have a group and there is a great clinical need and you only have 4 people who are attending consistently, it might cost the clinic a little bit of money to run the group. But if you're fully invested in that clinical service to be offered, you could make that up in a different way. But then when you're looking at, if I'm running a group, that same group, and I only have 2 people in there, is that really a group clinically speaking? And it's not fiscally viable. And so you need to really look at those 2 factors. And I guess also you really need to be really putting a lot of thought into deciding length of appointment. It's based on clinical need and other factors. For me, I look at not only clinical need, I look at sometimes mental health symptomatology. If I have somebody who has significant symptoms of distractibility and sitting in a seat for an extended period of time is difficult, I would probably schedule that person for a 30-minute session versus a 45. For me also, what I like to do is if I'm looking at my schedule and I have somebody who frequently no-shows a lot, what I would do is I would give that person a 30-minute appointment as opposed to a 45. That way if they show, that's great. Most likely I'm going to have 15 minutes in my schedule that I'm going to be able to see them for 45 minutes if I needed to. And if they don't show, I'm only not utilizing 30 minutes versus 45. And then how do you communicate all this with staff? Because most of the people that we work with in clinic didn't necessarily, for me it's not second nature, all of this money and math. So I really tried to make it so it was understandable to me and other staff. I really talk about the dollar and the quarter analogy. Okay, a quarter is not the same as a dollar, and I'll spend a lot of time on staff with that concept. I think it's really important to explain in a simple way that's easy for everybody to understand. And using visual models as a great reference, a lot of times when I'm communicating with staff, I always kind of equate what I'm talking about either to money or food. And it seems to work. People seem to understand the concepts. And then, you know, you would consider using the therapist self-monitoring tool as a resource. That's available on the website, and we're going to make sure that a link is posted so you guys have access to that. And that's a nice little tool that you put in. In a 7.5-hour day, I saw 3 30-minute appointments, and I saw 2 45-minute appointments, and the tool will figure out the weight for you. In my head, I always think about, okay, a 30 minutes, about 0.6, and a 45 to 0.8. And so, you know, I don't know all of the CPT weights of all the different codes that we can do, but I think it's important for clinicians to understand the ones they use the most and how much value and weight they have. For me, I always started with the most important and relevant pieces first. Like I said, one doesn't equal one. Getting people to really understand that can be challenging at times because for many years we worked into a contact as one. Really have people understand the big pieces, like the pieces that are the most important. Assessments have a higher weight than individual sessions, okay? And that's because it takes me more time to do it. So you want to make sure that, and we typically don't have this, somebody might say, well, I'm just going to do assessments all day. And if you have an assessment counselor, that's a great plan. But for other people, it's like, okay, how many assessments can I do in a day and still feel that I'm providing good clinical assessment skills and good engagement skills with the client? And how do I balance that with the other appointments? You can figure out a formula based on your clinic's expectations. The average day should have, and then you could tell people, this number of 30-minute visits, this number of 45 minutes, and that would meet the productivity goal of the day. A group needs to have at least this number of members to basically break even. That means that the time spent versus the weight earned, and then create cheat sheets regarding the weighting of units. A lot of times, clinicians, we've had a lot of changes in OMH clinic in the last couple of years, which are really exciting. But with that, if we can create cheat sheets, little ways that are easy for people to remember all the things that we need them to remember now, I think that's really helpful.
Thanks, Julie. So let's talk about challenges in calculating weighted CPT units, and some of the challenges that certainly we faced in making that conversion. We did make the conversion when the APG changes and the CPT weights did go into play, and it's taken us a while, but we've designed those systems. Well, one of the problems we faced, and this is one of the problems that many other people might face, is that CPT weights may not be actually built into your billing system. So as you bring data down out of your billing systems, we do it on a monthly basis. We bring down the data. We know who the service was, who the server was, who the client was, what the time frames were, what the procedure code was, what the service code was, but nowhere in that transactional database is actually a CPT weight. So in many cases, and one of the barriers for a lot of people is, and how do I get those CPT weights attached to each of these transactions? The other thing is we have all these systems designed for providing units of service. We have ways of getting information. We have ways of reporting it to people. We have our reports all worked out. People are familiar with them, and making a conversion to a different system can be difficult. It's difficult. It's time-consuming to retrofit your existing infrastructure that you use in this area. It's difficult to communicate to people. It's difficult to get the understanding, and you have to rebuild your reporting structure. So obviously, there are barriers and complications there. The final thing is that using CPT weights for unit calculation is inconsistent with Consolidated Fiscal Report or CFR unit definition used by OMH. So now you're counting two different things. So I mean, those are challenges and they're barriers. So what did we use? I'm going to go a little geeky on you here. So some people might understand and some people don't, but I think there are concepts and ideas that if you don't understand that you need to be talking with some of your folks in-house who are more technically astute, is that you can really use technology to attach CPT weights to each transaction. I mean, that's what we do, is that one of the ways of doing that is Excel 2010 now has a functionality to it called Power Pivot. Power Pivot allows you to join two tables together. Think about it as a one-to-many kind of a relationship. So I have one table that may have 50,000 transactions in it, has a CPT code, but has no weight. I can have then another small table that has each of the CPT codes and the weights attached to them. And through Power Pivot, you can attach those bits of information. So suddenly you have a transactional file with CPT weights and the weight of each of those transactions then you can use for your analysis. So you can also use technology to aggregate and summarize data across different meaningful dimensions. So I'm in a situation now that I've attached the CV weight to the transaction. Well, again, a plug for Excel, but Excel has done a very nice job in these areas. You can create an Excel table or an Excel pivot table or Excel pivot charts, and you can filter that data by person, you can filter that data by date, you can filter that data by date range. You can create examples for people to be able to look at their data, and you can put it together in a relatively visual format. And the final thing is and what I talk about is think dashboards, think simple. If you give an individual a report where they have to find themselves, they have to find the numbers, they're not quite sure what it means, it is sometimes a very difficult thing. So we use, I'm going to switch over to show you real quick as an example of something that we use, and it's called, I use a tool called Tableau, and I take the data and join it in the way that I discussed, and we put together a quick and dirty productivity tool that is available for each individual. And you'll see in a very small footprint here, what I'm able to show is somebody's no-show rates against their benchmark. I can show them the weighted units of service per month against their benchmark. And I can show them the ratio of billable hours to paid hours against their benchmark, and I can show them that for each month. I can also show them what the percentage of units is on a year-to-date basis. I can show the percentage of the ratio on a year-to-date basis. I can flip through people. I can flip over and take a look at aggregate data as it relates to individual sites. And I can, as you can see, there are fewer days in February, so we generated fewer units of service. It's pretty simple, but we did pretty well in January. I can filter on sites. I can filter, take a look at all. I only show you that example is because one of the things that you really need to start thinking about, if you're not already doing that, and we've talked about this, is simple, straightforward, easy, visual ways for people to take a look at where they are, where they're going, and what they need to do. So a couple of the simple tools out there. Excel has tools that you can really put into play to do this. If you're not familiar with Excel tables and Excel pivot tables and pivot charts, I'd suggest that you find a buddy somewhere in the organization who knows how to do that and begin utilizing some very powerful but also very simple tools to put into play.
And David, that's so funny because in my head that's exactly what I was going to say. Find a little nerdy person, and I'm a little geeky myself, but not as great as David is. You find somebody that is willing to help you with these things, because I don't need to invest my brain in understanding how all of these things work. I need to know enough to get the information and analyze it. I need somebody who can do everything else.
What you're seeing on the screen right now is as part of the financial benchmarking tool, there is a tab on that called the CPT Unit tab. As we were talking about unit weights, you can go, we're going to be talking about this tab more in the next session. We'll be talking about service mix. We'll be talking in more depth about how the CPT weights interact with each other and what it means, and we'll be taking a look at this tool. I just wanted to show you that that's available. So if you're not familiar with the CPT weights, just bop over to that tab. You can start taking a look at that, and we'll be working on how that can be put into play more for planning and analysis later. But as a starting point, the weights are all sitting out over there. Okay. I'm going to switch gears for a second. After we've gone through the CPT weights, we've really landed on a definition of what a unit of service is. And it's relatively simple, and that it is the service weight attached to the CPT code. It is aggregated to get total units of service weight, and it's a relatively good representation of your inputs and your outputs, and therefore is a more precise measure as we start analyzing units of service and setting our unit of service benchmark standards for our staff. The switch that I'm going to make now is to start talking about a new concept. The benchmarking model also relies on another concept, which is called the percentage of billed hours to paid hours. This is a concept that we stole from MTM Services. We had worked with MTM prior to the changeover to the APG coding and found this to be a very helpful concept. It's a little bit more difficult than the CPT, but it has some very important pieces to it. So what is a percentage of billed hours to paid hours? It's the percentage of all paid hours a staff is expected to provide billed services. Yeah. Let me walk through the example. So you have a work week. This example really focuses on a full-time clinical employee. Let's forget about all those indirect care costs and direct care costs. You have a social worker that you've hired, and that social worker is required, has no supervisory responsibilities, doesn't do URQA. You're just expecting that that person is going to provide good quality clinical services in your clinic. So what we have for this individual is we have a 40-hour work week. You take that 40-hour work week and multiply that out by the 52 weeks in the year, then we're going to basically say that that individual is going to be paid 2,080 hours in a year. So we take a look at our model, and we use the benchmark model, and we use the quick analysis, and we sort of say what we think is that an individual really needs to be providing billed services or 60% of those paid hours. Now, there's an interesting distinction. I always called them billable services, and Julie's corrected me on many occasions because she calls them billed services. It's not enough that they're available to be billed. They need to be billed as it relates to your fiscal viability. So one of the things that we'll be looking at as we put the benchmarking model into play is this is a critical variable that you'll be applying to your circumstances to determine what this number needs to be for you to be viable. 60 is probably a number that would be a reasonable starting point for you. You can always drive it down, and you can always drive it up, but one of the things you really have to ask yourself is, you know, are you creating a productivity expectation that is just not workable? And one of the reasons that this whole benchmarking model was created originally is because as I was looking and we were looking at the changes in standard, we really didn't know what the new unit of service benchmark needed to be. And what I needed to do is put together a model that would allow me to play with that number, that in combination with payer mix and cost structure and direct versus direct, we could find that number and set that number as a standard. Our standard right now is 58%, but we've seen standards. I think that MTM services right now are talking about 60% as really being a place that you may want to try to get to. So what does that mean? So if 60% of the time that you're paid, you're providing services, that means the total number of hours per year that you'll be providing services is 1,248. Now, if we think about this, if an individual is doing, as an example, say you have a clinical staff, they're doing concurrent documentation, they provide 2 30-minute services in a 60-minute period, they'll get a CPT unit count of 1.2, but will only have used one of their billed hours of the year. So one of the things is that you have to, the part of the communication with staff is they look at this and they may say, oh my God, 60%, are you nuts? One of the things you sit down with people and say, okay, let's look at this and more clearly, because we understand you can't always do 30-minute visits, and we understand that if there's a 45-minute visit, there may be some lag time before you start another service that all gets built in. But one of the things you have to take a look at and communicate with people is that these are achievable numbers. So you have, 1,248 hours in billed services. Depending on what your leave time benefit is, you'll have a certain number of hours that you'll be paying people when they will not physically be on site and able to provide services. You're going to be paying them for sick time, you're going to be paying them for vacation, personal leave, you know, you may pay people for educational opportunities, you may have a benefit package that, you know, I mean, everybody has a benefit package, and so what you'll be paying is you'll be paying people and they won't be physically there. This includes holidays also. So one of the things you need to take a look at is take a look at what your average benefit package is, and then determine how many hours people are going to be unavailable to provide service. So if you take the standard, okay, I need 1,248 billed hours. My fringe benefit package on average means that people are out about 15% of the time. They're not on site and we're paying them. You subtract your benefit package from your necessary billed units, and then you have a number of hours that are available for other things. And those other things can be a whole variety of things. They can certainly be supervision, and they could be paperwork, and they could be training, and they could be travel from site to site, and they could be a whole variety of other time that is required, or other tasks that is required of them that does not generate a billed unit. We talked a little bit about this at the at the office hours last Friday, and people were wondering where that time goes. Well, we count that as a direct hour, but it's in this bucket of time that we can't bill for. So it's an important concept, and let me talk a little bit about why. And let me talk a little bit about no-shows first. So what role do no-shows play? Well, we get this question about a lot. Some people, what they do is they actually change unit of service expectations based upon no-shows. Well, we don't look at no-shows in that way. So what is it? A no-show or an unfilled cancellation? That is, you have an hour in the 1,248-hour bucket that you set aside to provide a clinical service, and either the client did not show or they canceled at the last minute and that hour went unfilled. That's what we call a no-show. And what happens then is that no-show reduces the 1,248 hours by 1. And it now moves down into the 520. So what that no-show does is it really directly impacts the staff's ability to meet the percentage of build time to the paid time standard, and therefore your unit expectations, because you need those hours to make your unit service expectation. So instead of making an adjustment to unit service expectations for no-shows and cancellations, we really talk about that as a scheduling problem or a scheduling issue. So I have this 1,248 hours that I need to provide billed service. I know that a certain number of people are not going to show or going to cancel late. One of the things, the suggestions that Julia made earlier is that, okay, if you have a high no-show person, schedule them for 30 minutes and cut your losses from the fiscal standpoint, and only lose a portion of the time.
I'm sorry, David, and I'm not only going to say from a fiscal standpoint, if I'm a clinician and my schedule is booked and I have used 30 minutes of my clinical time with somebody who didn't show, it's not only a waste of time fiscally, but that's 30 minutes that I could have been helping somebody else.
Okay. So, yeah, so when we take a look at this, so one of the things is you can schedule differentially around people who no-show a lot. Some clinics, if you're a chronic no-shower, they have a no-show group. Okay, if you need to come in, we have this group at Friday mornings from 9 to 10. We touch base. I mean, there's different ways of doing that. The other way of doing it is to take, and you'll see why on our performance measures, we talk with people about their no-shows. They say, okay, if you average 20% no-shows, then you need to be scheduling 20% more people than you need to see in any one day, week, or month. Now, that becomes a difficult thing because you end up maybe overbooking a little bit, booking yourself back to back to back to back, and there are going to be some days that everybody is going to show up and you're going to be fried. And there's going to be some days that you get your normal or even an abnormal no-show rate, and you're going to have time in your schedule to sort of catch up and breathe. There's no perfect way of doing this, but it does speak to how you schedule, how many people you schedule to accommodate that, because what you don't want, and this is the killer is the leak of the billed hours into the non-productive hours. Okay, so I guess the other thing that you need to take a look at is, so as we're looking at this, so you're a supervisor and you're working with somebody who has low productivity, and what we're talking about here is there's different factors. could be scheduling, it could be engagement, it could be no-show and cancellations, or it could be overuse or more than normal use of a leave time benefit. So what we basically do is it's a model. We have to take the average amount of time. So on average, people are going to be using 15% of their leave time for, or their paid hours for leave time. But if you have an individual who is using in excess of that, that is, they take their sick days as soon as they earn them, that's usually the case that happens, is that if they use more than average of the leave benefit, it puts a strain on their ability to meet their unit of service standard because it draws down from that magic 1,200 and puts it into a different bucket. So one of the reasons we find this percentage of billed time to paid time as an important concept because it brings to the forefront all the different circumstances that may be affecting a person's ability to meet their units of service. So it's not that we're going to go and hit somebody over the head with a 2x4 because they can't make it. This allows you as a supervisor, as a clinic director to say, okay, what's the scheduling look like? What's the engagement piece look like? What are your use of your leave time benefits look like? What are the different factors? Because it will be different for different people. And this allows you to take a look at these different areas to make a better decision about how you want to mentor and counsel your staff who are having difficulty.
And that's an excellent point, David, that you might have 5 staff members who are not hitting their productivity, and there may be 5 different reasons as to why. And so I think when you get the big concepts down in terms of using a lot of time, high no-show rate, low engagement rate, not scheduling enough people in their day, I think you kind of get trends, and then when you have the solutions for those trends, you can use them for whatever clinician who, has a high no-show rate.
Okay, so we're to the point that we're actually going to talk a little bit about how these concepts are played out in the model. So how does the model use these concepts? Well, once I get through this slide, I'll pop over right to the model and we'll show you more directly. On the fee-for-service contracted direct care tab, what we do is we ask you to set a CPT unit per direct care hour for your contracted staff. And what the model does is it contributes to the estimate of the total CPT units for your contracted staff. The reason we ask you to set that explicitly is that you may have different unit expectations for your different service providers. We found out that your psychiatric staff have a greater ability to generate more billed CPT units per hour than, as an example, your clinical staff may, or your nursing staff may. If you take a look at the CPT weights for the medical services that we're now allowed to do, those are relatively small weights. So if you set a high expectation for an individual that is unable, because of what we ask them to provide in our clinic, is unable to make those weights, that can be difficult, and we don't want to have the model overestimate the weights that they will be generating or underestimate the weights that another staff may be generating. So it's an important distinction in the model. On the model analysis tab, we don't do a unit of service, we don't do a CPT weight. The model estimates CPT units of service based upon the percentage of billable hours to paid hours. So this concept then calculates the CPT units based upon the number of employed direct care staff. So together they generate the CPT unit estimates, and they drive the revenue estimates and calculates the gross cost and the gross revenue per unit on the model's analysis and benchmark tab. So let me let's take a second to jump over to that model, and we'll take a quick look at how that gets set up. All right, you get the benchmarking model. Okay, so let's start with the contracted direct care, and you'll see the field is right here. It's a field that can be changed, and you put that for each individual person. So in this case, we think that our psychiatrist can generate 1.2 units per hour, and we calculated that a contracted social worker can generate 0.83, which is basically saying is we'll pay you an hour, in this case $45, and in that hour, on average, you will generate 0.83, because you may only get a half-hour session in because somebody comes in late and you generate 0.62, or you're able to do 2 30-minute sessions and you generate 0.12, or you're only able to do 1 45-minute session at 0.8. So you'll see is you sort of really have to take a look at the average of what you expect. There's no real science to this. You know, it is a model, but we want that to be relatively accurate. So that's where you set your units of service. And of course, the model is going to calculate that out, and that you're going to see right up here in our model is the units of service that is generated based upon the number of hours we're going to pay people and how many CPT units we expect from them in that hour. The second place that we talked about is the model analysis, and that is right here. And we set that as a general number that drives a fairly significant part of the model. We find this is one of the obviously most sensitive variables in the model, and we wanted to give people the opportunity to be able to run different scenarios and be able to affect and change just a single field in the model. So as an example here, we have a break even, and we're expecting our staff, our direct care clinical staff, to provide billed services 57.2% of the paid time. If that, in fact, was in reality 52%, you'll see that the clinic is now in a deficit position of 60%. On the other hand, it was 60%, then you'll see that you're in a positive position. So an 8% variance on the percentage of billable hours to paid hours generated a almost $100,000 swing in your revenue generation. That's why I talk about it being a sensitive variable in terms of the model and in terms of what the model reflects, which is reality, that it becomes extremely important that you be able to use the tool to be able to determine what that number is going to be. And then you've got to then, once you've determined that, then swing back and take that cut that I talked about, take a look at what your benefits are going to be, how many hours you're going to expect people to be off-site. You're going to be paying people to be off-site and unavailable to provide services. And then one of the questions you ask yourself, are there enough hours left for people to meet this 60% standard? And the answer may be no, not given the way we currently provide services, but yes, if we change to a service provision pattern that is still clinically appropriate and warranted, but generates additional units of service and therefore additional revenue. So that's really how the model, so when you get down to actually doing the model has a relatively simple set of variables that you would apply to be able to complete the model. So let me jump back here. Okay, so I see we're running out of time. That's sort of the end of my spiel on this. I know that Julie will be talking about this, but we do have office hours next week. Please chat your questions in. Of all the concepts we've talked with people about before, this is the one these two concepts generate the most number of questions, but they're critical to accurate modeling, and so we want to take the time to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with these concepts.
Thank you, David. Let's talk a little bit about action steps. Before we do that, why don't we have the final polling question? Do you think your CIT has the information they need to complete the CPT weight section of the financial benchmarking tool? Yes, no, or not sure, and we'll give you about a minute to do that. When no one's talking, a minute seems really long.
I was just thinking that, actually.
A few more seconds. And can we close down the polling? And it looks like about 45% of us say yes, and then not sure is about 17%. And then a few people chose not to answer, which is okay. So what I'm going to suggest that you do, because we do have office hours next week, and so it might be a great opportunity for you to participate in that. And the action steps before the next webinar we're going to ask you to do is to sit down with your clinical team and really think about and discuss the following questions and come up with some answers for your specific clinic. What is our current definition of a unit of service? Is our current definition an adequate way to count units of service, or do we want to consider converting the CPT weighted steps? And if you want to convert to CPT weighted unit system, what steps do you think you needed to take in order to make that happen? Okay, if you could do us a favor and develop and send any questions you have to CTAC so we could answer them in the next office hours, and you can submit via the survey. And in the office hours, if you do ask a question and you're not able to attend, that's okay. We'll still answer the question and then we post it. And a great way to stay connected and to give and receive information is to sign up for the BEAM discussion board. It's a locked page and only open to BEAM clinics. The password is secret and it's written there. And it's really a great opportunity for clinics to ask, suggest, and offer advice to each other regarding day-to-day questions, as we're all facing the same things. Give it a try, and why don't you see if it works out for you. So we wanted to thank you really for participating in today's webinar. I know for some of us who aren't as knowledgeable about numbers, it can be a challenging concept, but really just try to take a little bit of time and think about how it would make sense to you. So we have upcoming programming. We have Module 6, Training Effective Utilization of CPT Units, and that is coming on April 12th, 12 to 1. And the office hours will be April 19th from 12 to 1. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys participating in today. And again, any questions you can certainly give us, send us an email.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope to talk to you at office hours, and if not, I think Julie and I will be back with you in 2 weeks and a day. Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday weekend.